What's up, Blazers? It's your boy Roman here, your favorite neighborhood Russian, and that is how most of the videos start to the YouTuber I'm going to react to today. That is NFKRZ. I think I got that right. It makes no sense to me why he has that initialism, but it is Roman. And so Roman is a young Russian from a city called Chelyabinsk. He's been making videos in English, and it's probably, I think, maybe the biggest Russian tuber in the English language, at least who discusses what goes on in contemporary Russia. And he recently left Russia because of the war in Ukraine. It's actually day 97 of the war. For reference, when I'm filming this, from what I can see, he opposes the war like a significant minority of Russians seem to do. But he also represents, I think, a class of young Russians that could be doing a lot more to stop this war, which is Russia's decision. They can just go home. And he seems to be waiting, along with a lot of people from the same social class, that someone else sorts out what Russia's doing for them rather than them taking action. Anyways, let's get into today's video. Поехали!
Tsar Experience.
So I'm sitting here in my hometown of Galway on the west coast of Ireland, and I've left Ukraine because of the war. I'm planning to go back pretty shortly to Ukraine. And Roman, he chose to leave Russia because, well, he says that basically he was worried about not getting paid from his YouTube because there are issues with sanctions against Russia. For him, issues for him about getting paid and his bank being able to pay him, and that is his basically sole source of income from what I understand. So he decided to emigrate out of Russia and go to Georgia, neighboring Georgia. Now, Georgia is a country that shares some similarities with Ukraine in the sense that they both used to be in the Soviet Union, and then they gained independence upon the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in 2008, I should say that both of those countries expressed interest in joining NATO in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, and then subsequently Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, two separate enclaves there, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and Russia basically invaded and seized control or effective control or supported these two separatist enclaves. So the Georgian government today has no effective control over those. So, you know, he's immigrated a country that has a recent experience with Russian military aggression. So interesting choice for him to go there, but it's still pretty open to Russians. Apparently, Georgia, you know, when I had left, I went first to Romania, then to Hungary before I came here to Ireland. And when I was in Budapest, you know, I met several young Russians who had come from St. Petersburg or Moscow while I was there in Budapest, and they also opposed this war. But when I dug a little bit deeper and said, well, what are you doing concretely to oppose the war? They didn't seem to be doing anything. They didn't write anything even on social media, never mind organize protests or organize, you know, helping refugees Ukrainian refugees in Budapest or sending money. They just basically said, I'm against it, but yeah, I don't want to do anything. And then when I looked at my Russian friends in general, who all of them oppose the war, but again, they're not actually doing anything concretely to do something about it, which, considering that Russia is sliding from authoritarianism to totalitarianism, and at the moment thousands of people are being killed, have already been killed in Ukraine. We're talking about civilians, Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers, tens of thousands of people. We're probably not going to know the full number for a while. Obviously, then you have Russia leveling cities like Mariupol or Severodonetsk, where like they have already done, and other cities in Donbass, Volnovakha. Multiple stories of war crimes, looting, widespread looting, either by individual soldiers or by the Russian state, just loading. I just saw Mariupol loading stolen metal onto ships and grain. It's just like an appalling pattern of behavior by Russia. And if you're Russian, it's also your country. So, you know, being from a country doesn't all mean, like, I could talk about Guinness and the green fields, but I can't just only talk about that if the Irish government starts doing something appalling, right? It's also part of being, you know, Irish, and it's the same for being Russian. So even if you oppose the war, not doing anything just strikes me as odd, first of all, because it's the future of your country, and this Roman has even had to emigrate because of what's happened. Now, I understand, obviously, in Russia that you can't openly criticize the government. They have these the threat of prison sentences or fines, and You know, there's been a few cases where people made an example of if they basically openly criticize the government or what they're doing. But at the same time, he's already left the country. So, you know, why doesn't he do anything there? He's got the biggest platform basically on YouTube for a young Russian who talks about contemporary culture in English. So why isn't he doing more? So, you know, he got a fair bit of criticism, apparently, because he made a video or two reacting to people who have criticized him for not doing enough in their opinion. So let's see what he says.
You rejected democracy and wanted dictator Putin, so it is your responsibility. You should be ashamed and hide. Instead, you are happy and you make videos. You have no humanity. What you guys want me to do, okay? And I'm gonna be quite honest, I'm gonna be quite frank. The reason why I'm not doing this is because I'm scared, okay? I do not want to be a wanted criminal in Russia, okay? It's my home country. I have relatives and friends there. I want to go back and see my fucking family, okay?
So there you see, he's basically like, well, I'm not gonna take any risks because, yeah, I want to be able to go back to Russia. I want to be able to see my family. And it doesn't matter to him that, yeah, Russia is killing thousands of Ukrainians, that probably tens and tens of thousands of people have died. Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian soldiers, even Russian soldiers. The lowball estimate is over 15,000 fellow Russians have died. But yeah, he thinks being able to go back and see his relatives is more important, or taking any sort of risk that you get a criminal record in Russia outweighs that. So he's basically saying, well, I'm not taking any risks. That's how I interpret that. And remember, he has a channel where his revenue is coming from a Western platform. His content is about Russia, right? So it's also not just he's a normal guy, but he also basically makes his whole career about talking about Russia, but he doesn't really want to talk openly about what's going on. So let's see what else he says.
So I know you guys are like hardcore as fuck, and if you were in my position, you would probably be like, just shit on the government. Cool, I believe you, I guess. But to be quite honest, if you were in my position, you'll be doing the exact same thing.
No, Roman. That's not the case. Not everybody is just going to think of their own personal interests and, you know, just do nothing about a potentially genocidal regime that is your government, that is killing literally tens of thousands of people. Not everybody is like you. You're trying to project onto everybody who watches your videos and say, well, you would not do anything because I decided to do nothing. No, not everybody thinks like you do. So again, that's just really weak and lame. Yeah, that's disappointing. I mean, I liked plenty of his videos from before, but just kind of like, I'm not gonna do anything because, oh, if you were in my position, you wouldn't do anything. Well, lots of people take risks. Unfortunately, maybe what he's projecting is a lot of Russians like him are not taking risks, but you know.
I do not really think there is anything morally wrong to do that in order to not lose the ability to literally see your fucking family.
Well, why doesn't he come up with some plan to deal with his family? Maybe get them out of Russia? Yeah, I don't know. It's just so lame, I find it. You know, there was an organization set up by a Russian guy. Basically, it was set up an organization because he found it so hard to talk to his father, who was living in Russia, and he was living in Ukraine, about what was really going on because of the amount of Russian propaganda and not telling people. Obviously, it's a war, and the Russian government is going to have propaganda and not want people to know what the terrible things they're doing in Ukraine. But the bigger issue for me is the fact that with the internet, all those Russian people could get real information if they look for it, or at least a more balanced opinion, right? If they went and look for it, and they're not really interested, it seems. So there are other people who take risks, set up these organizations to help people who are trying to communicate with the relatives in Russia who don't understand, or just basically repeat the state propaganda that the Ukrainians are all Nazis, we're saving the people of Donbass, whatever other BS that they've heard on the news, but not Roman.
A lot of people are kind of mad at me because in my videos I've never once asked anybody to donate to Ukraine, essentially. Well, the reason is actually quite simple as well. So like this comment right here is one good example of that. If he was bitching about sanctions but ended his video with, oh, by the way guys, I have linked some official sites so you can donate money to Ukraine, I will be fine. He has 1 million followers now, it's the least he could do. But he's asking donations only for himself, and it's putting me off him. First of all, the reason why I'm not basically posting anything regarding donations for Ukraine is because they also passed a law which basically says that if you spread information like that, or if you ask people to donate, or if you do it yourself, it could be literally counted as treason. And again, you also could go to jail for like 10 fucking years. So that's something I would like to avoid. So it's flat out fucking simple. I want to see my family.
And there he says he doesn't encourage donating to Ukraine because, yeah, he might get in trouble for that. But he had absolutely no shame in saying, oh, donate to me, but don't donate to Ukraine. It's just very, very weak. He doesn't live in Russia at the moment, so I have to think about just from a legal perspective, whether he'd even be liable. But I guess in Russia, potentially. But again, there you see, just every excuse. Oh, the government told me not to do it, so I guess I just won't do it no matter what. Yeah, he's just complying whatever the Russian government tells him to do. It's more important for him to be able to go back to Russia, even though it's basically heading towards totalitarianism, and to risk anything to stop the bloodshed in Ukraine. It's just, I guess, the question of values here. I mean, basically, with my channel, am I going to be able to go back to Russia with Putin still in power? Probably not, right? And that was actually going to be my biggest growth opportunity with YouTube. But I made a decision, and yeah, it was a pretty easy decision to make. I'm not going to be on the wrong side of history. So
the fact is that in the future, if one day I want to like go to Europe, for example, if I want to like study in a university or whatever, usually what they ask from you is like a paper that shows that you have no criminal cases against you, basically, right?
So then he gives another lame excuse about whether in the future he might want to apply to university in Europe. And then he says, oh, if I have a criminal record in Russia, then they're not going to let me in, or it's going to be a problem. You be a dissident. I think you'd probably get in easier. If you had the criminal record for protests against the Russian government, you'd probably be able to apply for refugee status, and then, yeah, you'd have no problem getting into university. Maybe he just needs legal advice. Is that what it really is, Roman? Former lawyer. Maybe write me. I'll give you advice about what you should be doing if you want to, yeah, still maintain your options to go into university in Europe. Not really sure why he wants to do that when he's a full-time YouTuber and doing very well.
And yeah, if I would talk a lot of shit, I will have one on me. And that will basically close my entire prospects for my whole fucking future life.
Absolute BS. He's a YouTuber. He's obviously making a pretty good amount of money at it at the moment. So his career is over. He'd probably make more money if he got arrested and convicted in Russia and then presumably released and came out and made videos again.
That is something as well that I would kind of like to avoid, you know what I mean? But of course you don't care because you have no idea what it's like to be Russian, you have no idea what it's like to live in Russia, to come from that country and to watch every word you say.
Yeah, I have no idea, but I just came from Ukraine where thousands of people are getting killed. But I guess that's just not so important, is it, Roman?
People are basically saying online, if you go to Reddit or whatever, people are saying, yeah, we understand that these sanctions are impacting the regular Russian people, but this is done so that they rise up and overthrow the government. It is not going to happen. I'm telling you right now. All these sanctions that are being imposed, restricting Russians from traveling abroad, putting trouble into their daily life, it literally only is beneficial for the government.
And then he criticizes the sanctions on Russia, basically, because they hurt the Russian people, but they won't compel them to go and overthrow the government. In fact, he says it helps the Russian government. Now, sanctions and imposing, it's a bit controversial in terms of if it's to basically force regime change, because it has a bit of a checkered history in terms of leading to a changing government. It can actually reinforce the power of authoritarian or totalitarian governments, but it often does lead to their downfall, but it also does take a bit of time to take effect, and it's not going to be immediate. Now, the other reason for sanctions is simply to suck a lot of the war chest, right? The ability for Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, to finance his wars, if he doesn't make as much money. And basically, he won't refer to the war as a war. He calls it a special military operation in case he gets in trouble. And basically, he makes himself look a bit stupid by just using the government's propaganda, what they mandate that he say, even though he lives abroad, even though he's doing the channel in English. Yeah, it's just all very weak sauce in light of what is happening in Ukraine.
You pretend like this is out of your control or it's not your actions, which is blatantly false and a wrong way of looking at it. Then he talks about you should watch the documentary about 2015 Ukrainian revolution, Russians would rather run away like cowards and pretend it's someone else's problem. Holy shit, I'm a coward. Yeah guys, I'm a fucking coward. I'm bitch made, I'm a pussy, bruh.
Yeah, you are, Roman. That's just the reality. And then you get confronted by Euromaidan revolution, or the revolution of dignity in 2013-14 in Kiev, where a large number of Ukrainians took risks to their own safety. What do you think would have happened if Yanukovych had stayed in power in Ukraine? You don't think those people were going to face some consequences, like criminal records, possibly been imprisoned, possibly been tortured by the Berkut, possibly been killed? But they went and did it because they wanted a better future for Ukraine. I don't know what Roman is waiting for. Is he waiting for the Ukrainians to fight all the way to Moscow and liberate his country of the current government? Because him and the social class he's from many of them just don't want to take any risks or do anything or get off their backside and help change things. I don't know, it's just like, yeah, not very impressive at all. Very disappointing because he has this massive platform and he's just like, I don't want to take any risks. Oh, you know, thousands of people getting killed, not such an incentive for me to do anything. Let's contrast Roman with a guy who hasn't left Russia and is doing at least a good bit more, who has also a YouTube channel in English, doing the same kind of stuff as Roman.
It's almost been 3 months since the start of this special military operation of Russia against Ukraine. In this video, I'll share my thoughts on how I personally fare under the sanctions.
So this guy, Konstantin, has not left Russia, he hasn't emigrated, and he's been showing the effects of sanctions, showing what's going on, and he is there in Russia. So he's actually really under threat of being potentially arrested for his content and convicted and suffering the consequences that Roman, who fled, and that's fine. I understand he didn't want to stay in Russia with the current government and he wanted to still make sure he got his money, but this guy's actually there. Let's see what he says in his video. It's kind of poignant, I think.
In my eyes, there's a tragedy happening in Ukraine and I feel responsible and guilty. Yes, responsible and guilty. I take everything very, very closely. And the thing is, it's not just me feeling that way. Some people that are close to me are the same way, and some people I know, some colleagues, not all. My estimation is that the 3/4 of Russians not taking this thing too personally, too closely, and some would support it. Perhaps that's what they show. Perhaps they feel differently inside, but that's the feeling I get.
So there you see, he's still in Russia and he thinks, yeah, about 75% support for the war or just kind of acquiescing with it.
And about 1/4 of Russians that I know are very touched, are very disturbed, are very sorry. And the worst part is that I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine, when this bloodshed is going to stop, what's going to happen with my company, with my life. It's just, everything is so turbulent, and it's only been 3 months. What will next 3 months bring? I don't even want to think about this.
So there you go, a very different, more emotional, painful reaction to what's happening in Ukraine without the excuses like, I might get in trouble if I say something, but there he talks about it and he shows what's going on. And he shows kind of the acquiescence, the compliance of most Russians with what's going on. You know, it's the attitude of a Roman. If it's not going to, you know, why should I take a risk to change things when my government and the army of the country I'm in has just invaded Russia's neighbor, killed thousands of people, razed cities, mass looting, rape, torture, and other war crimes, potentially even a genocide. And yeah, he's not going to do anything about it. He's not even going to take a risk that he might get, you know, not even put a post or a link for donations to Ukraine, not even to help refugees in Georgia, maybe. Nothing. He's not going to do anything. Not going to do anything about it. Yeah, just, well, he already used the word coward about himself, so maybe he feels a little bit like that. But why is this a terrible path for Russia? Well, let me read a poem from 1946 by Martin Niemöller. So he was a German priest who originally supported the Nazis. I think we're all pretty much aware of what the Nazis did and the heinous crimes they committed during the 1930s and 40s. So I'm going to read the poem. It's a very famous poem. It's a very short one. So yeah, and then we can reflect on maybe the attitude of people like Roman. Als die Nazis die Kommunisten holten, habe ich geschwiegen. Ich war ja kein Kommunist. Als sie die Gewerkschafter holten, habe ich geschwiegen. Ich war ja kein Gewerkschafter. Als sie die Juden holten, habe ich geschwiegen. Ich war ja kein Jude. Als sie mich holten, gab es keinen mehr, der protestieren konnte. Yeah, it's first they came for the communists or the socialists. And that's the thing, if you don't do anything, I mean, just out of your own selfish interest, like he's saying, well, I'm not going to do anything because maybe it has this consequence, like I get a criminal record or I get fined or I can't go back to Russia, I'm on a list. But maybe you should think about, yeah, what's going to happen in the future if Russia slides towards totalitarianism like Germany did. And maybe that's even for him and his own skin going to have bigger consequences. Because he doesn't know how things are going to go. Especially because he is a Russian citizen. Now he's emigrated to Georgia. But what's he going to do after? Maybe Georgia decides they don't want Russians there anymore. Where is he going to go then? Maybe it becomes an issue on YouTube, even getting paid as a Russian citizen. He's going to do what? He's probably going to apply for asylum in the West, I guess. And maybe then we'll see him finally say something in his channel for his own interests. But let me just look at one very strange part of his reaction, which is that he cites Ben from Bold and Bankrupt. And Ben has, like Roman, close to nothing on his social media since the war began, except for when he was fleeing Ukraine. Having basically said the whole time that it was Western hysteria, nothing was going to happen, making a lot of kind of snide Instagram posts about it, including about people being potentially taken off to camps who are gay and stuff. Just seemed a bit baffling to me. But on top of it, like, I understand maybe he wants to go back to Russia again. Interestingly, Roscosmos, Telegram channel, posted a photo of his passport when they detained him recently in Kazakhstan. The Russian space agency has some authority where there's the space station. Apparently he got stopped there, and it showed that he has a 3-year Russian work visa. So, you know, I guess he wants to go back there, and maybe like Roman, he just doesn't want to say anything in case, you know, it prevents him being able to do that. And that for him, even despite he has a massive channel, over 3 million subscribers, and his whole theme has been in the region between Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, former Soviet Union, nearly all his content. Let's see what happens when he's hanging out with Roman.
Bold and Bankrupt is actually in town right now as well. He's here in Tbilisi, and we met up yesterday and we went for a coffee, and then we were walking outside on the streets in a very sense of Tbilisi, and we were actually walking by the parliament of Georgia, and there was like a small sort of I guess protest there, if I could call it that. It was like maybe like 5 people that were just standing there with like a banner saying Georgia stands with Ukraine. They were basically just standing there, kind of, you know, not saying anything, but there was a woman there that stood with like a banner, you know, with that quote about the Russian battleship, and she was basically screaming, you know, go fuck yourself. And you know me, I would just walk by that.
Okay, so you described a scene where they go past a protest against the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this is in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. He says, you know me, I would just walk past that because, well, yeah, people in Georgia apparently are allowed to protest the war, unlike in Russia. And there's that famous, it's now a postage stamp, the painting, the scene from the beginning of the war that was used in Ukraine's propaganda, which is the conversation between the Moskva, allegedly, it was of Moskva, the big Russian battleship, the flagship that's actually that's subsequently sunk, presumably by the Ukrainians with anti-ship missiles. So now lies on the bottom of the Black Sea. But iconically, one of the Ukrainian soldiers, in reply, he said, Russian battleship, go fuck yourself, when the Russians demanded that they surrender. Yeah, I'm not even sure why this is a big deal, that someone had that written on a poster when they're protesting the war. They're telling Russia, like, just basically leave Ukraine. That's the message. And it's an iconic post, but let's see how they react.
But Bold and Bankrupt decided that he would engage in conversation, which was a mistake, but he did. Bold started, you know, responding to her in Russian, and he was like, what are you doing? Like, what are you talking about? I guess he just tried to, you know, provoke a reaction of some sort.
Oh, there, he's pretty brave, right? He can go up to a protester who's protesting the war and start challenging her. Interesting, that.
And since Bold spoke Russian, right, that woman immediately got super hostile, started walking towards him and saying, you know, basically Russian, fuck you, go fuck yourself, iди nahuy. And Bold is just like, he's like, I'm not even Russian, I'm English. And the second that woman heard that he's actually not Russian and that he's British, she was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, I thought you were Russian. What? How does that make it okay, right? So now that you found out he's English.
How does it change things when the war has been conducted by Russia and Russians who have launched this imperialistic war on Ukraine? And who's supporting Ukraine? Who's giving them weapons? United Kingdom, the Brits. So definitely changed things. By the way, it seems that Ben, from his description, was trying to start an argument with her, so presumably in Russian. So the assumption was he's a Russian coming over to basically harass her when she's protesting. And I've actually suffered this myself, because when we were in Bucharest, Angela just had a peace for Ukraine sign, said nothing. It didn't say Russian battleship, go fuck yourself. And a guy who was pro-Russian, he said he wasn't Russian, his Russian was extremely good with a slight accent. He came over and started harassing around the street for even calling for peace in Ukraine, right? So yeah, I can understand that, how that might be perceived, someone coming over and berating you in Russian.
Bolt actually got pretty pissed, lashed out on a woman a little bit as well. He was like, no, fuck you, you told me to go fuck myself. And it was crazy because obviously Bolt is like the kind of person who has love for Russian people, for regular Russian people anyway. And he as well got kind of a little bit triggered by that phrase where she was like, oh, you're English, I'm sorry, but if you're a Russian, fuck you. So yeah, that was pretty crazy.
How nice that Ben is defending the honor of Russians everywhere, when it seems like the majority in sport basically attacking Ukraine and killing thousands of people. Interesting. Because his social media is silent, when is he going to criticize Russia for killing thousands of people, including Russians? If he really cared about the Russian people, maybe he should be criticizing Russia's decision to send tens of thousands of soldiers to die in Ukraine.
But that's like the only like very hardcore example of somebody like hating on Russians, period, on every single Russian, no matter what their opinion is, right?
Yeah, I think that you should ask people's opinions before you start lambasting. Maybe they're against the war, maybe they're British and they're actually in favor of what Russia's doing, so maybe you should find that out first. I agree with that point. But yeah, you see the kind of attitude. It's like there's no problem with going over and picking a fight with a protester against the war, but posted something on social media that might be against the Russian government, that might get you in trouble, like you're not going to be allowed back into Russia, that they're not willing to do. But, you know, when there's a woman there's holding a sign, then they're all brave. Anyways, that's kind of his, I guess, moral reference. And what did his moral reference do during the war as well? Didn't I see a video where he went to Syria, a country that's got nothing to do with his channel, and he made a travel vlog more or less on behalf of the Syrian government, the one that is supported by Russia. And he even went to Aleppo, that was, well, heavily destroyed. I don't know if it's completely razed and with very heavy civilian casualties. Yeah, he went there and he made almost like an advertisement for visiting. And when he was doing that, the city of Mariupol was similarly getting razed to the ground with thousands and thousands of people killed. And he thought it was appropriate. That he has no problem with doing. Apparently that's fine. Anyway, it's just a bit of an odd moral kind of, I guess, for me, vacuum that Roman here lives in and who he hangs around with. Just very, very strange that they think this is all kind of normal. Oh, let's not criticize Russia, we might get in trouble, but yeah, let's go and pick a fight with the woman at the anti-Russian war protests. The Roman go over and say, yeah, we're with you, we're against the war? Apparently not. He just wanted to walk past it. So anyways, just to think in general that there is definitely, as I was saying, within this social group of people who oppose the war in Russia, just too many of them don't want to say anything. Like that Konstantin guy was saying that he talks to people he knows about what's happening. He goes, he searches out, you know, other information to understand what's really happening in Ukraine, not what Russian state TV tells him. And Roman's fully aware if he goes and looks. Like he has the access, as all Russians do. I mean, no matter what the government is pumping out on TV, which is a lot of it quite vile, anti-Ukrainian propaganda to basically justify killing so many Ukrainians. There was even one clip I watched that, this is on Russian state TV, Prime Team TV, talking about that they would need to basically get rid of, i.e. kill 2 million Ukrainians. The 2 million Ukrainians that basically they're not going to be able to re-educate, I guess, basically brainwash into supporting the Russian government after they take over. I mean, it's just so eerily similar. Like the Nazis, to refer back to that poem, they didn't kill all the Jews on the first day. They didn't kill all the Roma. They didn't kill all the dissidents. It's over a period of time. And yeah, just enough. Too many Germans just didn't do anything to stop it. I guess that's why I feel exacerbated by it when I see people who, yeah, have opportunity to do something, I guess, just take the easy way out. They just look at their own very narrow self-interest, and they have this big platform opportunity, and they don't want to do anything. And then they make excuses about it. So anyways, that's my video for today. Do pobaczenia, do svidania, ciao ciao.
SAR Experience.